Hi, friends. I'm Heather Miller, CEO and founder of social impact startup Grasshopper, talent acquisition and DEI specialist, mom of 2 humans and 3 fur babies, most under 4, former professional ballet and hip hop dancer, yoga teacher, interior designer, caregiver, provider, retirement planner, innovator, social connector, and the list goes on. As you can tell from my bio, I've always taken drive to the extreme, and for the most part, done pretty well juggling all of my hats. However, I say this on behalf of most of us, the past 3 years have been very challenging. My personal experience included moving to an unknown city, the unexpected death of my mother, and the birth of my first child 2 weeks later, launching a startup during maternity leave, the pandemic, building diversity strategies for a global corporation in the wake of George Floyd's death, another baby, and then, the icing on the cake, a layoff. I felt like I was approaching a midlife crisis with no space to do so. As a result, I've been thinking about balance and whether that's actually a thing. Join me as I speak with some amazing thought leaders and women in my life to understand how they keep the fire going and the lights on while staying sane. We'll explore drive, juggling priorities, taking no prisoners with your schedule, love and sickness, pursuing your dreams, enjoying the journey, and figuring out what is right for you. We hope these conversations help you err on the side of midlife epiphany versus midlife crisis. Welcome to Balanceness. Jenny, welcome to Balanceness. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here.
Go
I
ahead.
feel like there should be like a background information, which is that this is a podcast, but it's also, there's 30 plus years of friendship. So there's a familiarity that probably
that's exactly. And we are going to talk all over each other, which I know is like rules for the road for not to in normal conversations. But I think you and I can we can put those aside. I was totally going to give some background here. I usually start with where or how I met my podcast guests. And so when I was thinking back, I think we were 9 when we met. Yeah?
I think 11.
11
later.
Oh, that's right. Actually, that makes a lot of sense because I have this like vivid memory of you in the cabin. I think I came second month, August. You had already been there a month. So you were like fully integrated into the cool kid group. But yeah, I have vivid memories of you as the new kid at 11. And then I also have vivid memories of our matching Betsy Johnson dresses at like somebody's bat mitzvah.
Sure.
But yes, long friendship. So let's start by introducing you to the community. And because we're talking about balance, and we'll give context to this in a second, but like tell us about all the parts of you.
For sure. So I am a social worker. I've been a social worker for 20 years now. I have a degree in psychology, a bachelor's, so a professional degree in social work. And then after I had my first child, I went back to school to get my master's degree so that I could do private practice. And for the last, now he's 16.
So crazy.
So for the last 15, 14 years, I've been working in private practice and working through sort of a specialty in anxiety and depression with adolescent and adults, as well as supporting people through transitions in their life. I'm trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and I also have certification in trauma work, as well as work in attachment. So I have all that those are sort of my toolkit. And generally speaking, what I try to do is support people through some of the challenges they might be experiencing in their mental health, in their relationships, and in their parenting.
So crazy.
I'm also a runner.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I cut you
That's
off.
my other part.
I thought that was the
I have
pause
three
that I was
kids.
supposed to.
That was no, it's fair. It's fair. I have three kids, and 16, my son Ethan, 14, my daughter Lila, and my youngest is going to be 12, and his name is Ryan. I am married. I've got my partner and my husband is Randy, and I'm a sister. I'm a daughter, and I'm a runner. I'm a new to CrossFitter. We'll see if this airs and I'm still doing it. And I'm also the kind of person that really enjoys my downtime, and I have a place by the lake where I spend a lot of my time as well. That's me.
What I was going to say before is it's so crazy when you said you've been in this career for 20 years. Like, I still think of ourselves as like fresh out of uni. Like, I remember when you started working in Jewish Family Services, right?
That's right.
And then I also remember when you went back to school after Ethan and thinking like, oh, like this is so adult. I think you were one of my first friends to have kids. And you were like, there was so much adulting. Like you had the kid, then you got in this place where you went back to school and you were juggling it all, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then, you know, thinking about your private practice, it's just crazy to think about 2016 years of all of this. It's insane. Okay, so since we are talking about balance, what does balance mean for you personally?
So it's interesting. Balance for me is a felt sense. It's not necessarily so prescribed as it's this much of this work and it's this much of my family time and it's this much time of my friends. It really is a felt sense of, do I have a good understanding of what my work is needing of me right now? And that can sometimes mean I'm working all the time and that still feels okay because everything else is in balance. It's more about a grounding for me. It also is about the ability to say no to things. God bless.
Thank
and
you.
It's also about the opportunity to the flexibility that I can experience between going from thing to thing and not feeling the mental load of the other things seeping through because I have some things unfinished that are overwhelming me. Balance has to do with my sleep. It has to do with my diet. It has to do with my movement. It has to do with knowing what's going on in my friends, what's happening with my friends. You know I'm out of balance if I'm not responding to the group chat because I can't in that moment. That doesn't mean that everything has to be met with urgency, but it means that the things that are important, that are dear to me, are getting the attention and my focus of me in that moment.
I love that. I've never heard anyone describe it as something that's like a felt sense and not like having to segment through like time frames, I guess. But my question around that is like there must be some sort of scheduling work involved here because you've got so much on your plate, from like 3 children to being a partner to being a best friend to, you know, having work that is demanding to all of this. So like how are you compartmentalizing or segmenting? Are you like an integrator? Do you what's your style?
So I can say that I'm a multitasker, but I am not my best when I'm trying to multitask in the relationship category. So,
Okay.
for example, if I am rushing somewhere because I need to get a kid to something, I'm not phoning a friend then. To me, that's not going to work. It's about carving out the time. And in many ways, my life has been scheduled to support a balance, right? So when I started off my career, I was working weekends, I was working late nights, and that's also when I had my kids. When I started my practice, I truly believed that I needed to accept every client and to be there and available for all the time. And I think that in many ways, you start to feel the ache of I'm not able to do all the things that I want to do, the kind of mother I want to be, the kind of partner I want to be. And so I've created some pretty clear boundaries around my work life in terms of timing, and also my family life in terms of, time with my husband, trips with my husband. Since my kids were young, we've always prioritized, not often, but we've prioritized time together alone. And I wish we had done more of it when the kids were young, to be honest. I felt a lot of strain around that. Yeah. And it's also generally about being able to look ahead and schedule things. One of the things I'm finding, I'm in my 40s, and it used to be like you make a plan for the weekend, you could do it on a Thursday for a Saturday. I have friends booked in November right now because I have to schedule. I want to see everybody, I want to do different things, but if I don't make an effort ahead, time just kind of withers away. So I'm really intentional about my intimate, my close relationships. I'm intentional with my spouse. And then I am really careful and boundaried around my work, because that allows for me to feel balanced.
Yeah. So you just said boundaried, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. And so let's talk about boundaries in the context of balance. I've called you a million times when I feel like my balance is off, like when I really need an SOS around romantic relationships, friends, when I'm feeling the balance is off with my children's caretakers. And just as you said, when boundaries are off, you start to feel out of balance. And so why are boundaries so important in the context of balance? And then I guess the follow-up question there is how intentional do you need to be around boundary development?
Well, just to give context for me, I think that it's valuable to know that professionally, I can tell you all the different things, but as a person, as a daughter, as a sister, as a mother, it is absolutely something that I struggle with. And I think that boundaries require often hard conversations that don't want to be had. And so what ends up happening is we swallow that discomfort. And, for me, I'll bleed out, it'll come out, you know what I mean? I'll feel it. And so Prentice Hemphill has this great quote that is, boundaries are I'm going to mess it up. Do you mind if I look it up so I can say it properly? I does it so well. Hemphill says that boundaries is the distance that I can love me and you simultaneously. And isn't that stunning? Yeah. It is so true, because there are times, and I'm going to say this, that I think it can be gendered, where we're giving. I feel like as a mother, I'm just giving to everybody in different ways. And I feel like I've pretzeled myself into all of this. And there is no way that the consequence of that is me withholding love. When I am not able to properly identify what my needs are, and other people's needs are so much more important, I inevitably have a hard time. And so boundaries for me are saying no. Boundaries for me, which is one of my hard things for me, is asking for help. I hate asking for help. I want to appear like I can do everything. I want to be able to appear like, if you ask me to do something, that I'm the kind of person that can show up, that will do it, And it is something that I learned later on that was very clearly important, that if I don't say no, I'm going to say it differently later in a way that I can't take back. I've had situations where I say yes, yes, yes. Yeah. And then I blow and I'm not my best self and I'm frustrated, and I knew my tipping point and I extended. For me, because I have experienced childhood trauma, children who've experienced trauma have very poor boundary sense, because their boundaries have been pushed so frequently that they're unable to identify, because they're being either asked too much. It's maladaptive for us to overextend, but I understand the roots of it. And therefore I can sort of acknowledge when I'm doing it, even if my tolerance and threshold is too high. Does that make sense, Heath?
100%. And I'm thinking of so many examples where the metaphor of pretzeling yourself, like, I mean, I do it all the time, especially with my children, but also with the workloads that I take on, the things that I say yes to. Then you mentioned just sort of like overflowing or having that burnout, or even feeling resentful to something that you said yes to, when all of a sudden it feels like an obligation, not a choice. But absolutely. And so a follow-up question, we're going to talk about trauma in a second, and you talked about children. Do you think a lot of boundary building is taught, but do you think that there's something innate in boundaries as well? Like, is there a nurture versus nature component here?
I think that I'm curious what the correct answer is. My gut is that boundaries are taught. I don't believe that because it's not, because it's often a moving part. It's one in which you're either saying yes or no to. I believe that it is in fact one that is taught. I think expectations breed boundaries.
Yeah.
What you are required and expected, and that can be both positive and negative. There's a whole movement towards, autonomous supportive parenting instead of, I hate this term, but the helicopter, right? It's the idea of giving kids limits and helping them understand that they need to do that, and that breeds competence. Right? So it's not always negative, right? Parents can sometimes put some boundaries around things of like, no, I won't do that for you because you can do for yourself. And that can breed confidence and also allow for them to do it. It's different when you set that boundary and then you rescue. It's a different message, right?
Yeah.
So I think from a age, we can teach that. But I do believe that there is a relationship that's being modeled for a parent that does take on too much and is resentful and faces a child in that environment of unfortunate hostility, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think I'm like, I fall prey to that. I am a culprit. I mean, we'll talk about this in a second, but I, grew up with some trauma too. And so there was very little boundary setting between myself and my parents. But when I think about raising children, and maybe because Percy, my older one, was the first, like, I am way more apt to pretzel for him. But what's really interesting is, like, he's a kid. This is why I was kind of asking the nature versus nurture thing. He's the kind of kid who is like, he's so sure of himself. Like, he'll say yes or no. Like, he suffers no fools. Like, he's just like, if something doesn't work out for him, he's like, no, not going to do that. And like, has no guilt around it. Although, like, I'm the parent modeling the lack of boundaries. Maybe it's because he does have a parent, another parent who has very strong boundaries. So maybe he picked that up. But the question around it, I think, is really interesting.
But can I ask you a question? Do you think that Percy is the way that he is because he's been given such a secure environment for which no is available? Like, what I'm suggesting to you is it's not necessarily, he's being modeled one or the other. His security in himself comes from attachment, right? So he feels safe to say yes or no or whatever, where in environments where other children are raised, where they're more fearful and insecure, they don't have that groundedness, that feelings of security that permit the space for them to do that. So I don't necessarily agree, or I'm not sure that I agree that it has to do with the modeling one parent of setting boundaries. I think it also has to do with the fact that your child feels really secure and is feeling comfortable to say that.
I love that as an explanation. I will take it. Actually, one of our favorite teachers and now babysitters always says that. She's always like, he is just comfortable with you and he feels secure so he can be his full self. And sometimes we're like, I really wish he didn't need to showcase his full self all the time. But here we are. So how much do you believe in backing up boundaries with consequences?
So interestingly, so there's like the general. Let me ask you this: Are you speaking about
Yeah,
parenting, or are you speaking about in general?
just in general.
Okay, so I believe that there are some consequences for boundary pushing in a way that I don't think can be recovered. I have a phenomenal therapist, psychologist, who really taught me about compassionate detachment, which is a way of breaking off contact and engagement with a family member that is unhealthy,
Mhm.
and being able to love them, but also not indulge and not give up so much time and your own energy and own
Yeah.
resources to someone who is violating your boundaries over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it was through that work that I was able myself and my own personal family situations, and unfortunately it's happened more than once, where that is absolutely what I need to do so that I didn't get swallowed up by someone else's struggle.
And are you
And
saying
that is
the
clear boundaries. That is, I guess,
yeah,
it is
that's
a
what I was gonna say.
consequence.
Is that the
So
consequence
it
is
is,
the detachment?
it is, like I've had a family member who said, well, if we don't do this, then I'm going to hurt myself. And that happened, and it was sort of like, well, then I should do it,
Yeah.
and then I realized how unhealthy this relationship was. And this is an exaggeration, not an exaggeration, forgive me. This is the worst example that I have in my own personal history. But, I think that was a clear cut example for me of my breaking point, and that where I had to, I've had to block family members. If, my mom, just to give background, Heather knows this, but my mom, when she was alive, was severely mentally ill and was often not in control of her behavior and would do things that were outrageous and stressful for me. So I would take time away. I would take, I'd check in on my own time, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't be at the mercy of the constant phone calls. So there were different pieces, and those are the severe consequences of it, where, in other relationships, I think taking space is different than like a block or whatever. Sometimes people can be overly, uh, they can take advantage of generosity.
Oh
And
yeah.
so you can have hard conversations, and the consequence is just identifying, look, this wasn't okay for me.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't believe that clear-cut consequences other than space, breaks, and hard conversations really allow for
Yeah.
you to repair.
So
Mhm.
that brings up a good point. Like, why are these hard conversations so hard? Like, I've discussed this and taught this in a work setting, like a corporate setting, but it's so hard when you're in either a romantic relationship, even with your kids, but family. I really struggle with having hard conversations with my immediate family. So that would be, when my mother, when she was alive, my father now. I don't often have to have them with my sister, but when I do, it is so tough. Like, why is it so hard?
I think it's because, well, for a couple of reasons. I think often the conversations come so late that we
Yeah.
don't take them at the first feeling. We wait and wait and wait. And so it's really been built on resentment. A lot of people wait to build a case. There
Yeah.
was this, and
Oh,
there
the
was this.
case building. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that there's another part of it is that we also are really trying to protect our ego. A lot of the time we want to make sure that, we don't like the way it makes it feel about ourselves to have these conversations. So many times our identity is wrapped up in these relationships. So it's very vulnerable to come to it in a place where you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's natural to also acknowledge that sometimes people respond to these conversations in such a negative way that that's the reason we've been ignoring it. They can
Yeah.
be highly defensive or accusatory, and there may be parts of them ourselves we don't want to look at that they're going to shine at us. And so it is often more than, it's not as simple as saying, hey, wait a minute, that hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately, we could catch it sooner, it wouldn't be as hard. But I think that we don't feel empowered. We don't feel like we have permission or the right or entitlement to say how we're feeling when we feel it. And it's often really an expired feeling when we finally bring it to the table.
Yeah. I'm usually I would say, like, historically, my immediate reaction when something goes wrong or I am hurt is just a feeling of shock. And when you said case building, that really resonated with me, because I have to sort of really think through everything, the process, really measure, like, well, what was that person thinking when they said this, and how am I reacting? Am I being reasonable? So it takes me a really long time to evaluate whether I'm actually going to have that difficult conversation, which is which makes it difficult to have those conversations, because as you said, then you're bringing them up later, you're bringing them up days, weeks later, and I always wish that I was that person who could just like call it out on the spot, like have so much agency and advocacy for myself. But I think people handle things in different ways.
Well, I also think that when you're so I don't want to personalize it, but I do think that there is something about also, like, I know I work with some athletes, and sometimes pain threshold and emotional threshold is a little high. They're connected. And so you may not even have been in touch. Like, there were so many things I saw you do when you were doing ballet that I was like, that looks painful. And you're like, oh, 100%. But you kind of like brush it under, you know what I mean? And I think that sometimes it can be very invalidating when you're having those feelings, or people around you aren't validating your feelings, even a parent to a child. And so you're constantly wondering, like, is this okay? Is this valid? Do I have a right to this feeling? And in that confusion, it can be really suffocated. So I think that there is a real challenge in the entitlement of it. It's interesting. I was in synagogue because it was the Jewish high holiday last weekend, and I was in synagogue and I went to this speaker, and she was talking about like forgiveness and anger. And she was talking about the people there's 4 kinds of people with anger. There's the quick to anger, quick to pacify. So you're quick to get angry, but you're also quick to brush it off. I'm married to one of those.
Yep.
There's second one, which was like slow to anger, slow to pacify. Okay. So you don't get angry fast, but it takes you a while to get over it.
Hold a grudge.
And then there was the slow to anger, quick to pacify. Like, that would be great. Like, it takes you a while to even get upset, and then when you get upset, it doesn't take a while. And then there was the what she called the wicked one, where my husband turned to me and was like, I think that's me, which was the slow to anger, slow to pacify. So quick to anger, slow to pacify, right?
Oh,
that's the
what you're saying.
Okay. So, and it really resonated because, when you get angry, it's your indication that there's something wrong. That feeling, like, that's that sense for me. And for me, like, when we're talking about balance and we're talking about boundaries, those are my clues. And when you have a trauma, or you have a history of trauma, I think the reason I'm the quick to anger, I'm slow to anger, quick to pacify. That's me. Okay. So I think about it from the perspective of, like, I'm always, it's like the sussing out of threat. Like, oh, that I feel it. Oh, something might be not safe or not okay. But I'm very quick to pacify, almost like disassociative. Like, I don't even remember, like, oh, why am I mad at her? And someone will be like,
oh yeah, blackout. That's what I do.
Like, like I remember that now. So I think that the reality for me is, when I'm anger is my clue. When I'm feeling frustrated, anger, anxious, irritated, it's a clue to me that either a boundary has been crossed or that I'm out of balance.
Yeah. Yep.
You have a clue. What are your?
No, you're so spot on, because I think one of my questions for you was like, how do boundaries mitigate anger? And I'm going to give you the silliest, superficial example of this, but it happened to me a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like still thinking about it.
Tell me,
It's get my eyelashes done, right? And I think I texted the esthetician the next day, and I was like, oh, it's not right. She said, okay, great, come back in, I'll fix everything for you. However, I was traveling. I think it's actually when I was traveling to Canada. I don't know. So then and on the spot, she said, okay, no problem. Come back. Like when you return, fine. So I did. And at the end of the session, like I was ready to walk out the door. And she was like, wait, you need to pay. And I was like, oh, well, we had this like whole discussion beforehand about, you were doing a fix. So obviously I wouldn't have to pay. And she was like, oh, no. Like I would have done that had you come the next day, but because you waited, 10 days, I'm not going to do that for you. And I was like, oh, well, in my head, I was thinking like, well, it would have been like really great had you told me that beforehand. If I had that information before all the cards.
That's her role as a service provider, right? To let you know. Yeah. Heads up. Right.
Heads up, cards on the table. And then I could have managed my expectations, but I was so, I think, and then, I couldn't, again, because I'm somebody who like takes a while to process. I was kind of in shock. I was like, I cannot believe she's going to make me pay another $200 for this, and so anyways, I was like, I'm also somebody who really sort of wants to, I'm the peacekeeper, right? So I wanted to keep the peace in the salon, like didn't want anyone else to hear this, like sort of, not that it was an altercation, but this like uncomfortable moment. So anyways, and then I get out of there and I'm still thinking about it because obviously, number one, I didn't advocate well enough for myself, but also like I sort of like had this feeling that my boundaries were going to be pushed when I got in there, and I should have mentioned it up front. So again, like I was angry with myself for not keeping my boundaries. Like she pushed the boundaries, I was angry with myself. But it's I think keeping your boundaries is definitely a way of mitigating anger. So now that I just aired the,
but it's such a good, like, don't worry, at the end of the session, we'll list the name.
Yeah, exactly. Salon.
But I will say, like, that is a really good example. My kids will say they can sense with me when that happens. So I will be, I could be in an environment and someone is doing something that I don't agree with, or I feel that is I'm getting like little warning signs of like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And my kids will be like, they can sense it, they can feel it.
Yeah.
And I usually address it. And I have to tell you, you may say, oh, I wish I had that. There are so many times my foot is so deep in my mouth. Like I've said it too fast. I've jumped too quick.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, humility with it. I can be embarrassed by my, when you jump the gun, I sometimes don't check the temperature beforehand. It's happened on a few occasions, and not a lot. I try to give myself some grace and whatever, but, I think that you have, it is a balance between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get back to trauma. We people who undergo trauma have their boundaries shaken up. And I feel like, I've read that they fall prey to a lot of boundary myths. Like if I'm setting boundaries, I'm being selfish or I'm going to hurt this person. And I experienced that all the time because like I said, I grew up in a house where, like my sister, and this was a good boundary that was pushed, but my sister slept in my bed every night till I was like 18 and left for college. My parents gave me no personal space. They were often inappropriate with the way that they leaned on me emotionally. And so, can you share some examples of how your clients articulate this or how you help them set appropriate boundaries when there is trauma? And you can speak from a personal perspective or a clinical one.
No, I think it's helpful because truly, this is a really hard thing to undo. You know, you're raised sometimes in environments where you have a role in your family, and it's so disruptive and can be relationship breaking when you decide that doesn't serve me anymore, whether it be as an adult or just as a human. And there are often kids, I mean, I worked for a long time with children in divorced families. And, you know, peacemaking, you just made a really good point, that should never be a child's role. But, you know, when you find someone who is as empathetic and capable as you were in your role in your family, it's working, it's doing service for everyone but yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes the conversations that we have that I have with my clients are around, is it working for you now? What would it look like if you didn't do it? Where would, you know, I understand that you're going to be, and families can often, but parents especially, can be very clear, but you need to, it's family. You know, that's the way we do things in this family. Mm-hmm. You're so helpful. You're so wonderful. This is, you know, and you get love from performing these roles, and the fear of losing love or being disappointing is often unbearable. And it doesn't even have to be traumatic. It doesn't have to be coming from trauma. It could just be that, oh, you know how your sister gets in this time, go talk to her for me, tell her I'm sorry. And then you know, that child is going over there, and it's not because this is coming from terrible abuse or whatever. It's just what worked in the family. Yeah. But if it's not working for the person who's doing it, it basically says, go compromise your relationship for the benefit of my own. Yeah. And I think that it's identifying, what is that? What are our clues it's happening? What, you know, how do we communicate that we don't want to participate anymore? What are the fallouts going to look like? I've had parents call me, even adult clients, and say, what are you doing? You're ruining our family. Yeah. And I have compassion for it. I do, because it is absolutely dysregulating their patterns. But this client, you know, clients can often participate in certain things in their family roles that are to their detriment, that are creating tremendous dysregulation in their own bodies, anxiety, you know, difficulty with intimacy with new partners, because they have at any moment may have to leave and go run to save something going on in their family home. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of conversation around, you know, it sometimes can't even be said, but making small shifts and changes that help ground them in their environment. And sometimes it starts with, okay, fine, they've called. Can you push pause and not go so quickly? Yeah. It's just about making short shifts and eventually moving towards the goal of a family that's not enmeshed to a family that is, you know, and not codependent, but one in which an individual can, you know, live their own life with their own boundaries. Yeah.
You just brought up a point around, well, I guess moreover, like, why do we let families like permeate this boundary wall so easily? Like, what is it about the family setup? And I'm laughing because my sister and I were just talking about, one of my uncles is moving from California to New York, to Florida, to live close to the other uncle. And he's got all these animals. He's got like dogs, birds, the whole shebang. So anyways, the uncle that lives in California has been summoned to fly to California and fly back in first class with the parrot. And like, the parrot is just this like ornery, like, I don't even know, she must be my age. She's like a 43-year-old parrot who was taught by my Jewish grandmother to like tell everyone to F off and drop dead. And he's the one that gets stuck with this parrot in first class. And he's like already so embarrassed. And we're like, my sister and I were joking, but we're like, this is a movie. Like, why didn't he get to take the Yorkie, like the little dog? Like, why does he have to fly with like the parrot in his lap? You know what I mean? But it's like, well, why do
what happened if he didn't go?
I don't know. Somebody else would have to take the parrot. But like, why do we do things that are so unsavory for our families?
And why do we sometimes do them and only realize some people are so out of touch with what it feels like that it's not until they're in the doing that they even get the sensation of why am I here?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are times where I think, oh, like this will be fine. I have clients who say like, well, I'm going to do this and then I have to do this. And then my niece is going here. So I have to go do, and I'm like, huh? Why do you have to do any of those things? Do you want to do any of those things? And it's really an awareness of not being, of a lack of awareness, a lack of attunement to what is going to throw them off.
Yeah, I guess there's like a little bit of obligation in there, and then something around codependency too that I want to touch on. So like, what about with romantic partners? And I'm curious if you believe in the term codependency. It's something that I read about a couple of years ago, and then I'm sort of tuning into these days because I realize that I am a person who tends to be codependent, and in the definition that I've read is where you like put somebody else's feelings and reactions over yours. But like, maybe we can touch on codependency and sort of like the trespassing on people's personhoods, where you're trying to like control feelings, attitudes, behaviors, choices, or values. And these are all things that are like under a person's control and are not easily manipulatable, if that's even a word. So like, why do we try to do that? Like, what is it about codependency and trying to alter other people's reactions that make us feel a little more secure?
I think that with intimate partners, like if that's what we're speaking to.
Yeah, let's
or is that
for it. Yeah.
What you mean in terms of your partner? I think it has to do with, having your person have your back, and that idea of being taken care of. The simpatico that's required for that is often so essential to feeling okay. Yeah. When you're an empath, when you're the kind of person that can really sense when something is off, it really does affect how you feel. So if someone is not 100%, there's a contagion, and there is when you have a history of peacemaking, it's like almost ingrained in your soul to support and to help. It's really hard in those situations to feel okay when you're the kind of person that can, by osmosis, absorb negative feelings. So if they're not okay, I'm not okay. That's codependence, right?
Yeah.
Where, oh, you're having a tough day, I hear you. What do you need? You need some time alone. Amazing. I'm going out with my friend. Like, it is the lack of an understanding of separateness, that it's okay for me to go through our time and you be okay. But the discomfort in your own environment when someone else is struggling and you have a contagion to it is it is problematic behavior of codependence. Being dependent on another person, especially when you're parenting together, is expected. It's understood. It's kind of part of the contract, right?
Yeah.
But the mood, at the mercy of someone's mood, makes everybody feel out of control and unsafe. Not because it necessarily is explosive. It doesn't have to be like, so heightened. But if you get the sense that someone is struggling, and even if you're not even sure, but you have that feeling, and your body, you almost meet them at their temperature, it is absolutely an indication that there needs to be some form of separateness, so that until you can be able to, protect against that kind of, I hate to say contamination, but that's sort of what I'm getting at. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And then moving on to kids, like I read somewhere that assisting in boundary development for children is about teaching responsibility, which I loved, because we all want to teach our children to be responsible, independent, be able to do for themselves. Yet I have such an issue with saying no to my children, creating healthy boundaries. But if I can kind of think about it from an education lens, it makes it so much easier for me. So in your words or experience, like, how do you teach children and their parents, or adolescents and their parents, how to be mindful of boundaries?
So funny. I had this conversation I had a client this morning who was struggling, and she was driving to university to pick up her daughter because her daughter was having a tough time. And she was very clear with me that it was incredibly, like, she kind of knew that it may not be the right thing to do to rescue the child, but she was struggling. And she was a little bit embarrassed, a little shameful about both what she was doing and how she was feeling and how it was triggering for her. And I was like, I just want to know, I want anybody who could be listening to this, that I struggle with seeing my kids experience discomfort, sadness. I have a hard time of seeing it as a growing pain. I'm not good at it. So I don't want anyone to say, like, that, give any kind of false impression.
Yeah, like you're not judging.
No, not judging. Yeah. Not judging, and still not great at it, working on it all the time.
Yeah.
But I will say to you that when I was, 16 years ago, when I was figuring out what am I going to do for work, or like, should I be at home more? What am I going to do? The research all showed that the working mothers' kids were more resilient. Yeah. There was like a lot of evidence to show that. And I remember being like, okay, I'm going to go because it's going to help my kids. And what it really is, it does create, kids have to be a little more capable, a little bit more flexible, a little less reliant. And, there's that trend that I mentioned earlier around autonomous supportive parenting that is about boundaries. It is about, you can do this. It is there to breed competence. And when we're doing for our kids, it's amazing how little they can do. And also it's amazing how much they can take for granted and how quickly look at them, be like, I did this, I did this, I did this. All you had to do, like, this is, see why it's so available to me, Head? Like, it's probably something I said.
I mean, last night I was like,
all you have to do was go to the bus, like, you know what I mean? Like,
or like, eat this bite of chicken because I just was in the kitchen cooking it for you for 3 hours. And like, it's just so easy. And then you get what you want. Yeah. Meanwhile, Percy's like, he's like crying and tasting and spitting out like little chunks. They're like,
when my kids were babies, they were like, poison, you know, like, but the reality is that all the research, everything shows when you do for kids things they can do for themselves, you are taking away their competence. You're taking away their confidence. And so my kids are so much older. So I'm going to say this because it's a different stage. A lot of things they can't do for themselves right now. But the moment that you can, it is a disservice. And we see it in the kids that are overindulged, even in their pathologies of anxiety and everything. It is the messaging of like, I've got you, don't worry, I'll take care of this. But the undercurrent of that is, you don't have it. You're not going to get through it without me. I will need to rescue you. So it's a balance.
Yeah. That's so true. I always wished that my mother worked while we were growing up. She was a stay-at-home mom. Definitely, a backstage mom, helicopter parent. And I just felt like although I do think that I was able somehow to develop independence, I think there was a lot of like me living away from home at certain points, but I also think it would have just furthered the respect that we had for each other as like, independent people, women, and helped me build better boundaries. But okay, mindful of time here. We're going to play a quick game called Yin or Yang. It's like, are you familiar with the podcast Call Her Daddy?
Mm-mm.
If not, you have to check it out. Anyway, she does this like Ben Affleck or Brad Pitt with Gwyneth Paltrow, or really I should call it like would you rather, since you are so good at would you rather. But okay, in the boundary context, would you rather let your kids crawl into bed with you or preserve the marital space?
I'd rather the kids be in bed with me.
Same.
Like, I think it's really not one or the other, but I like my kids to have the option, especially as they get older, if they need you, which is not as common. If they need you, I want them to be able to have that space. I know,
just have all those cuddles now. Would you let your partner's bad behavior slide in order to avoid conflict, or do you prefer to hash it out right away?
We hash it out.
You do? All the time?
All the time, yeah.
Hash it out.
All the time.
Wow. I like
He's great at it. He's really good at feedback.
Yeah.
I am not as good as he is, but we really do argue well. We don't agree all the time, but we argue well.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, would you rather spend a destination weekend, like in a tropical, beautiful place, where you like the work-life boundaries where the lines were kind of blurred, or would you prefer like a solo weekend at home with time to replenish your soul?
Tropical. We're in Canada.
Tropical? Like whether you had to like work and all hours? Yeah, tropical all the way.
Tropical all the way.
Maybe that's because you're a Torontonian and you live in a cold.
Yeah, the pretext. I have to say one thing before we go.
Yeah.
Adrienne Gold taught me about the anger piece. That those 4 categories are not mine. She was the woman who did the talk at the synagogue. So I just didn't want to leave
that. I'll put that in the show notes, because I'm number one, I'm really impressed that you remembered those. But I love how little of an auditory learner I am, but I'm so impressed that you were able to like retain that. But also that was a very cool categorization that I'm going to do some more research into. Okay. All right. Well, love you. Thank you for being here.
I love you.
And
I'll later. I hope there's parts of that. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, love you.
Thank you for supporting another episode of Grasshopper's Balanceness podcast. If you liked it, please rate, review, and subscribe on our Apple and Spotify pages. Send me a screenshot at hello@grasshopper.com. That's GRASSHOPPHER to enter yourself into this episode's surprise raffle. And be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and events by signing up for Grasshopper's newsletter, which can be found on our website. Happy balancing until the next time.